So, my first impressions video came out a little while ago, and I'd been sitting on that video for a long time. Mostly because once I got to level 80, I knew there was a lot, and I can't stress this enough, a lot of new activities that opened up to me. Expansions, new specializations, raids, meta trains, and the focus of this video, fractals. To be honest, I kind of got really caught up in the game itself that I forgot to make content out of a lot of the stuff that I was recording, as even evidenced by this intro to Fractals video. I'm in tier 3 at this point already. And Fractals is also the activity that I'd been putting the most time into by far. Fractals are basically scaled down dungeons. Not scaled down in the sense of levels and stats, but size. So instead of the regular dungeons that have these multiple explorable paths and large areas, you've got typically only one path with less encounters. There's 4 tiers of fractals, each tier containing 25 fractals. Each one has a number next to it on its mission select that corresponds to its fractal level, and you unlock more by completing fractals at or above your personal fractal level. So, for example, if my personal fractal level is 20, I'd only be able to select fractal levels 1 through 20. If I finish fractal level 20, then my personal fractal level is raised to 21, and I can select level 21. And again, if I'm at fractal level 21 and I join someone else's, and let's say they selected to do a level 27 fractal and I finish that one, my fractal level will be raised to 22. Before I got to level 80, I wasn't really looking forward to unlocking them. I was liking dungeons so far, and knowing that I was getting less of what I liked at endgame made me not want to try fractals, but holy shit, I'm so glad I didn't wait long to get into them. Fractals having only 1 or 2 paths means that all the design time can go into them, so the content ends up being a little more concise and well balanced. Thinking about my experience a little more, dungeons aren't actually that great, especially my first runs through each one. There were so many times where I died and I just couldn't res because my party kept pressing on or just got caught in another combat encounter. Most of the dungeons also had outrageously dangerous trash mobs capable of just chain CCing and killing you, making an overall unfun experience. It was one of those things where if you were ever so slightly behind your team when rushing past, you just kinda got gunned down. Not to mention the stage traps that some of the dungeons had that seemed to just completely fucking chunk your health. Like, why was this a thing? Holy shit, I died for walking wrong. Maybe I'm just an MMO zoomer too used to Final Fantasy XIV, but god damn, bro, the dungeon shit was annoying. Okay, that one was my fault, but you get the point. Fractals alleviate the pain I felt from dungeons. The enemy encounters were designed better, the stage traps were somewhat dangerous but not outright unfair, and each fractal doesn't take that long to complete, which is a huge plus since daily fractal rewards are locked behind multiple fractal completions. More on that later. The paths that you're able to go down in fractals were also really clear, so I was never confused to where I was going. I've gotten lost way too many times in dungeons, and sometimes I join a dungeon already in progress just to see that I'm too far behind to be able to reasonably catch up, so I just leave. That's not really something that happens in fractals though, because generally the distance between where you spawn in and how far away your team is usually very short. And that's something that's very important to have, as it lets players that joined in late for any reason not spend an eternity catching up to their team. There's also this thing called Agony resistance, a stat unique for fractals, which is basically just a stat check. Once you start getting into higher fractal levels, Agony is a damage type that some enemies and the environments will do to you. It's damage over time based on your max health, and the only way to reduce that damage was with Agony resistance. You get Agony resistance in a number of ways, but the most common is just by getting and saving those +1 AR materials that dropped in fractals. Then, either crafting or vendoring a bunch of them to make a higher Agony resistance infusions. The thing about Agony resistance infusions is that they can only be slotted into Ascended gear, meaning the farther you get into Fractals, the more Ascended gear that's required for you. Thankfully, getting Ascended rings and accessories are pretty simple, but every other piece of gear that you need is going to be a bit of a grind, especially if you're like me and don't know how to target farm for extra Ascended gear. I understand the implementation of Agony resistance as a way of not only increasing difficulty, but as a way to also make sure players don't just blow through them all too quickly. But I think the amount of +1 Agony infusions it takes to make a +9 is a little too high, especially since you're eventually going to need multiple of these for each piece of gear you have. Then, upgrading your gear to be able to fit multiple infusions also costs materials that you need to farm for. Then, if you want to upgrade your +9 infusions to also give you stat boosts, then you're going to be ran 3 +9 AR infusions plus more rare materials. Then, it costs gold just to remove infusions from your gear, and you're paying this every time you want to remove them. And if this part doesn't sound bad to you, just remember that upgrading your gear to fit more infusions destroys any that you currently have equipped to it. It's a system that has so many steps to it, and it's such a resource sink that it just doesn't feel good when I finally upgrade a piece of gear with that +9. And the final nail on the head for me is knowing that I'm gonna need to go through this process again when I want to gear up another character with different stat infusions. Or better yet, if I want to switch builds or specs on my main Mesmer. To be fair though, I'm only just getting into tier 3 Fractals, so maybe the grind gets easier there, but as it stands, there's a bit too much for the AR infusion grind. I don't know a full solution to this system, but I think a healthy start would be to make infusion extractors just a basic feature, and make swapping the stat infusion you want free as well. Besides the whole Agony thing, I really enjoy Fractals. The difficulty of enemies feels appropriately scaled to the difficulty of the Fractal, but I do think some of the earlier Fractal levels are a little too easy, but that isn't a problem because it ramps up real quick. Eventually, Fractals start adding instabilities. These instabilities add modifiers to the level like giving the enemy a random boon when you hit them, or slowing you based on your missing health. And as you get higher into Fractal levels, a greater number of instabilities gets added, I think up to a maximum of 3. I really like the instabilities because I think they're a fair difficulty increase without making it feel artificial. What I mean by that is every instability can be dealt with either with better teamwork or changing a small emphasis on small part of your build. You won't be dealing with instabilities that just give enemies higher numbers than you. You'll be dealing with instabilities that give them a tactical advantage, and you have to plan around it. Even if it's something as small as getting slowed while low on health, it's something that I still need to think about and consider, even if it's just something as small as how long will it take me to move from one spot to another during a boss fight. And speaking of bosses, I think they're kind of hit or miss. On a mechanical level, they're all great. Coming from Final Fantasy, I really needed to get used to properly reading the bosses and their attack animations instead of just watching a cast bar, but once I got the hang of it, things got a lot easier. Most of the bosses in the later Fractals are top-notch. I'll never complain about Fractals like Shattered Observatory, Twilight Oasis, and Squana Peak. I think those are some of the peak boss designs that I've seen so far. Their attacks have good telegraphs, they're lethal in a fair way to the player, and the mechanics associated to the bosses are solid. Others, I kind of groan when I see they're in the daily list. Fractals like Snowblind, Captain Mytrin, and Chaos are okay at best. I think those bosses suffer the most from not having established aggro management in the game, since positioning the final boss is pretty important in all of those, but the boss will just randomly stop attacking someone and switch targets, moving it to a different location. Most of the time, it's kind of a non-issue though, because the game heavily encourages you to stack in melee, so when the boss switches targets, it shouldn't be that much of an issue if you're in a well-organized group. But I personally don't think that should be a problem that should exist in the first place, but that's a topic for another video. Fractals also have a daily aspect to them as well, split into two parts, the Tier X dailies and the recommended daily Fractals. The tier X fractals tell you to complete a specific fractal by name, so the tracker for it would say something like Daily Chaos Fractal. All you need to do is complete a fractal by that name throughout the 4 tiers. But if you complete it at a higher tier, you get the reward from all the tiers under it. So going back to the example, if I complete the Chaos Fractal at tier 3, I also get the rewards from tiers 2 and 1. Recommended daily fractals are a bit different though. Instead of having to complete them by name, these dailies are determined by the fractal level itself. So the daily would say something like Daily Recommended Fractal 25, meaning I have to complete Fractal 25 to get the daily rewards. And there's 1 recommended fractal per tier. I like this system for the fractal dailies. The game doesn't waste your time and make you do the same fractal over and over again in one session. But the side effect of this daily system is that players aren't incentivized to do anything other than the daily fractals. And if you're a person that already has all fractals unlocked, this isn't an issue. However, if you're someone like me and are just trying to level your fractals up, it becomes an entire ordeal trying to LFG and get people to join a party that isn't daily fractals. I've been playing hot and cold with my feelings on fractals this entire video, I know, so let me wrap this up with my final thoughts on the activity. Overall, I like fractals a lot. They're short-ish pieces of content that you can just do at any time that's fun to play and consistently populated, at least when trying to do dailies, so trying to LFG doesn't take long to find people. The Agony system, I think, holds fractals back because it puts a really strict gear requirement on the later difficulties, and I think it really limits what you could bring into fractals in regards to wanting to change your build or profession. It's something that can be alleviated in many ways. ArenaNet, please just give us account-wide Agony res, but it isn't something that makes fractals unplayable. It's my only major issue with fractals. Anything else I think are just petty or minor issues, like not liking some bosses or mechanics or just some levels in general. Thank you for watching. I plan on making a follow-up to this video after I've completely gone through each tier, but until next time, stay safe.